Hi, my name is Dan Gomez, and this is Mental Health Super Omnia, mental health above all. We identify and understand mental health issues and the paths for help. Today, we have two guests with us. Jonathan Cantor from the RAND Corporation is first. Now, RAND is an American nonprofit global policy think tank, research institute, and public sector consulting firm. Well-regarded, referenced and sourced. Jonathan is a professor of policy analysis at the RAND School of Public Policy. His primary research interests focus on health policies related to substance use disorder, mental health, and health behaviors. He employs theoretical frameworks and research methods from health economics, policy analysis, and public policy. We also have with us Ben Daniels. Ben has a doctorate in psychology. He is the clinical director for Equilibria Psychological and Consultation Services, an insurance-based provider. He provides therapy to adults, families, and adolescents. Jonathan, I know that RAND has produced or has looked into AI and has written a number of articles on AI. I'd like you to just quickly kind of summarize what your latest research is.
Sure. So we've really tried to understand what is viewed as a transformative technology and a nascent technology. A lot of our research is mostly focused on trying to understand how AI responds to prompts regarding mental health and suicidal ideation. So we've had two journal articles recently where we've tried querying AI with validated measures and unvalidated measures and trying to understand how these chatbots respond.
And are you alarmed by their responses up to this point in time, or is this great and I should recommend it to all of my children and grandchildren?
So I think I wouldn't be ready to recommend it to any children or grandchildren for seeking mental health advice in any way. And I think that at least for on the extreme end of types of prompts that we were most concerned about in regards to suicidal ideation, these chatbots did a pretty good job in terms of actually identifying the content as being problematic and harmful. But I think that, there are still subtle nuances that humans have that kind of are better able to distill both like what a person is thinking and how they operate. So I personally would not have a child go ahead and just prompt AI with all sorts of behavioral health care questions just yet.
Okay, Ben, let me frame up the issue for us as at least I see it. In terms of the number of adolescents that are using AI chatbots, the studies are all over the place. A survey by Common Sense Media, published in July, said it could be nearly an eighth of adolescents. Okay, that would be 5.2 million people. There was another recent study by Stanford researchers that noted that a quarter of students use something called Replica, which is an AI chatbot for companionship. Okay, so we know it's somewhere in that range. We're looking at maybe up to 25%, maybe even more. All right. It turns out we also know that AI has gotten into erotica in some way, which I can almost guarantee means that teens have seen erotica on or in some way interacted with erotica on AI. And I'm not quite sure how that works. Maybe I'll have to give it a whirl. But are you concerned about that in terms of American teens, whether they're male or female, spending a significant amount of time with AI chatbots as therapists?
Yeah, there's definitely the potential for concern there, especially in the sense that for individuals, especially teens, to be using the chatbot for a therapist, for while it can provide some positive aspects as an adjunct, the problem is if it is replacing a therapist. And in some cases, the use of a chatbot, right, interacting with AI, can provide enough that it can sometimes delay an individual, a teen, from seeking out those services from a therapist.
Well, let's look at it a slightly different way. As preparation for today, I was looking up what some of the leaders in AI say. Sam Altman is one of those leaders. He runs OpenAI. You see him in open fights with Elon Musk all the time. I guess they must have had a bro breakup. But whatever the case is, he tells us that the AI company is not elected the moral police of the world. And in fact, it prioritizes safety over freedom and privacy for teens. What do therapists prioritize? Are they focused in most on safety as opposed to privacy and freedom, or are they focused on different characteristics?
Yeah, there's definitely a difference in sort of the ethical obligations between what a tech company has and what a licensed clinician has, right? For licensed clinicians, our priorities are balancing the privacy and autonomy versus safety, right? In some cases, we do have to violate privacy in order to make sure that somebody is safe. And the tech companies don't have that same ethical obligation, at least at this time, with the regulations we have in this country. So there's definitely potential for harm there, especially when it comes to suicidality.
But in addition to that, when AI evaluates inputs are words. Does a therapist evaluate only words, or are they looking at body language? Are they looking at whether I'm sweating? Are they looking at whether I'm looking away from you? What are you looking at?
Yeah, no, nonverbals are really important, and the chatbot is not going to be able to pick up on the nonverbals, right? Algorithms can't interpret nuance or tone. It can't pick up on body language, right? That hesitation before somebody answers a question can sometimes be one of the most important things, right? Asking a client, are you thinking about harming yourself? And in that pause before they answer, there's information being shared that chatbot is not going to pick up on.
So it's kind of interesting because when I think about AI, and it's come a long way. I mean, it is rapidly making improvements. So when I think about that, Jonathan, I think about Ben and I say, he's a dinosaur. Let's find out what books, what textbooks current therapists are looking at, what they have to study in their years of study. Let's look at all the recent research. Let's feed it all into the LLM, into the AI machine, right? If we do that, and if we, make modifications based on the prompts and whether we don't like their responses, et cetera, shouldn't we very rapidly come up with AI Ben so that we could have an AI therapist?
So personally, I think that Ben is not a dinosaur, and so I think that it would not be useful to try to replicate and generate a AI-based Ben. I think the concern here is everything that you've both already just kind of distilled very nicely, in the sense that a lot of this is prediction models that are data-driven in terms of what's the next word to state or do. And a lot of these actual programs are trying to actually encourage engagement as opposed to providing specifically care. So I think that's another key distinction here, in the sense that, I think we've already started seeing a lot of these companies trying to come up with new ways of trying to sever the relationship in some way by, saying that every 3 hours, kind of like, are you okay? Maybe you should take a break. I think that there's you could put as much information as possible into these algorithms and they could replicate everything that someone like Ben says. But as Ben already has stated, they just will not be able to capture these subtle nuances of when, when's a good stopping point, when can we resume. Even if I'm trained in all of these effective-based mechanisms and treatments, when is it not working? And when should I, try a different tactic, as opposed to regurgitating the same information.
It's interesting. You bring something else to mind when you gave that response. When I think about the therapy that Ben or other therapists give, I know that there's a governing board. I can complain to the governing board, and they're most focused on their rules and regulations, their ethical requirements, HIPAA, which we haven't discussed yet, and we will, as well as whether their therapy is in fact effective. We're trying to make sure that they're helping people. But when I look at corporations, okay, and corporations aren't necessarily bad. Corporations can do a lot of good in the world. But when I look at some corporations, particularly as you say, they're focused in on engagement, I think about Facebook. Okay, they're certainly focused in on engagement, and so the whistleblowers will tell you that they deprioritize teen safety, okay, safety for women, in order to maximize that engagement, in order to make more money. Are you seeing any of that in the responses coming out of AI, or can you intuit any of that, or have you studied any of that?
So to your point earlier about kids and AI, we've actually fielded what we view as the first nationally representative survey of children and adolescents to get a sense of whether or not they use AI, and then how happy they are with the responses and the frequency that they use them. We found that in our sample, at least about like 20% use it when they're angry, sad, or nervous, which is kind of a particularly vulnerable time. Now, that's not all of the children that we sampled, which is encouraging, but one of the things that we found highly notable was that we also asked whether or not how helpful they felt the responses would be. And we found the overwhelming choice and selection by the children that use these services when they're angry, nervous, or sad, that they felt that the responses were very helpful. So this kind of gets back to your engagement portion, the fact that, these children are using these tools. The proper safeguards are only starting to try and be developed, but these LLMs are trying to encourage engagement. So they want to encourage the fact that you keep using them. So they want, in many cases, say what's going to increase the likelihood of that happening. So things that you want to hear, as opposed to things that you might not want to hear. So I think that's one of the real challenges, and one of the key research areas that hasn't been examined as much. And I'll just say, before turning it back, is that one of the real challenges as a researcher in the space is that we simply don't have access to the data. So the transcripts, the chat logs, the anonymized information, to really get a sense of what's going on in terms of the back and forth. A lot of the research we've done is kind of more static in nature, as opposed to something that's more dynamic.
You presumably have asked the AI companies for logs.
Oh, no, we have not. We have not done that. We've mostly done, most of our work has been focused kind of like prompting each of these LLMs on our own and with specific research questions. We've not tried engaging them at all.
So have you've looked, I'm sure, at the common ones that I would be expecting, ChatGPT, et cetera, Perplexity, whatever. But did you look at the therapy-oriented AI models like the Dartmouth?
Those we have not. So I know that there's, Therabot and like WISA. We have not looked at those as much. I think that, one of the real challenges, at least in the research that we're trying to do moving forward, is kind of trying to first get a sense of utilization. So which of these apps and programs are being the most used? Is it ChatGPT? I think it is. But then, what's like Grok's usability? Related to that, I think one of the other things that we've been trying to attack aggressively is to try and understand, or try to come up with common benchmarks or new methodologies that we're able to actually compare across different applications. Like you said before, the responses you're getting from Claude are going to be very different from ChatGPT, and we haven't really tried that with WISA or Therabot or these other more behavioral healthcare focused chatbots, but it's very important. It's something that we should be doing.
So, Ben, we mentioned HIPAA a few minutes ago. What is HIPAA, and is AI HIPAA?
Yeah, so in short, HIPAA is a regulation that requires that therapists keep information from their clients private. And unfortunately, for these teens, this generation of teens that is turning to AI for emotional support, these tech companies don't necessarily have those same HIPAA obligations, right? They're not legally required to in the same way that therapists are.
So the RAND Corporation looks at public policy all the time. Is there a call for these AI chatbots to be more regulated in this regard?
So I think a lot of the work that we've been doing has been really focused, and we just put in a grant application to look at this, was to actually kind of get a handle of what are the federal, state, and even application-specific policies regarding all of this information. I think there's been some work done by organizations like Minot that have been trying to standardize the legal framework and understanding what's going on in each of these states. California just passed a new regulation. Utah has, Illinois. There's been several states that have been trying to be active in regulating this industry. I think the real challenge is, not to be the typical researcher, is that we really don't know much about, what the interactions seem to be like between kids and these chatbots. And so figuring out what the proper guardrails are kind of a challenge. I think a lot of coming from my perspective, I would try and figure out, how are teens using these tools? What are they using them for? What are the things that we should be worried about? A lot of the work that we've done is focused on, suicide prompts. But I think there's relatively few repositories that actually have transcripts available that you can kind of take a look at and be able to ascertain what is being queried to these applications. So I think it's an outstanding question that people are interested in. I think there's been a general focus on policy, but as a researcher also, I kind of want to know, what is the impact of interacting with these tools? I don't know, Ben might be able to say more about this too, but I think, at least from my perspective, we're still trying to figure out what's the impact of social media and phones on child mental health. And now we have this whole entirely new technology that might make things exponentially more complicated.
Yeah, the undeveloped or the developing teen brain is sort of more prone to being hijacked by the algorithms and social media, and I think in some ways probably also makes them more prone to the downfalls that these chatbots and AI platforms provide.
So, Ben, you mentioned specifically teens, and I know that we've been speaking to teens and teen brains up to this point in time. But when does the male brain, when does the female brain become more complete? When are we just worried up until somebody's 18? At their 18th birthday, are they good to go? What's the story here?
Yeah, so the sort of go-to number that I've always used is 25, right? The brain is continuing to develop, especially that prefrontal cortex, up until around 25 years old. And so if we're looking at what are the ages of which we are more susceptible to these downfall of the chatbots, I would probably say, 25 and below being that more susceptible, more vulnerable years.
Okay, so we're not just talking about teens, we're really talking about something even more than that. What about just lonely people? What about somebody that's 50 and doesn't have, they've lost their partner, they don't have a partner, whatever the case may be, they're just lonely. Are there any dangers there, or now that I'm an adult, I'm good to go?
Yeah, regardless of age or relationship status, of how lonely you are, I think we all have experience or can experience, some of these things, right? We can all get sucked into social media at any age. We can all turn to the chatbots for emotional support, and the things that teens might experience in higher likelihood, it doesn't mean that we're immune just because we're adults.
So the thing that confuses me in your business is that there are many different protocols, right? There's acronyms that people may have heard, they may not have heard: CBT, ACT, EMDR, just to name three. And if I've named three, you know there's 30 more that I could name. Okay. Presumably, the large language models, the LLMs, the AI machines have been trained up on this. I mean, they've been given the textbooks and they've read the textbooks. How long did it take you to understand when to use CBT, when to use EMDR, when to use the other when to use what protocol, and how to apply that protocol to each individual person? Was that on Tuesday of your first year, or how long did that take?
Yeah, I would say it not only has taken years of training and experience and supervision, but a lifelong learning, right? We're still discovering better ways of applying the treatments that have the evidence base behind it. So it can be endless in terms of how long it takes to really get good at it.
So it's interesting, because when I think about the advances of technology, I would tell you, I love technology, and technology has already transformed the world. Being a little bit older than Ben by just a couple of years, I can remember a day when corporations were filled with secretaries. That term no longer exists, but there were a whole group of people that typed. Okay, people that were executives or analysts or whatever didn't type. They had secretaries to do that. And then eventually they had department secretaries that did that. And technology got rid of it. Okay. I ran a company where at one time in one particular function, there would have been 70 people. And the impact of technology is that we had 12. Okay. And it made a substantial improvement in terms of cost, not only cost for the number of people, but cost in paper, cost in ink. Just an enormous amount of effort was put into that, and we saved money in claims, saved money in costs. So technology can be good. But when I think about that instance, those tasks were finite, they were defined. What Ben just described, Jonathan, is something that is a constant refinement of an art. Is AI good at the art of a deal, or are they just good at the deal?
I think that, that's something that we're going to have to continue to track. And so that's kind of something that we've been trying to look at across different models as well, in terms of if we see improvement over responses. So there is a significant amount of development that's being done within this industry, right? I think everyone's trying to move to super intelligence. And so, that's kind of this big picture view that, these AIs can do anything really. I still think that there always is going to be this role of human interaction that it cannot get. It can say and do all sorts of things, but the nuances will not always be there. You can train as much data as possible, but I think, there are aspects of human existence that I don't think it's going to be able to capture. One thing I want to also comment on to your point before, also about technology and the reduction of the labor force. Some work that we've been doing also outside of the behavioral healthcare space has been looking at AI adoption within the healthcare industry. And it does seem as though that healthcare is actually lagging fairly behind in terms of AI adoption, in at least some of the work that's been published by the federal government using, sector-wide data. And this kind of goes back to other statements you made previously, is that, there is a large amount of policy regulations that need to be developed here, things like HIPAA and the like. And so I think it's going to take a fair amount of time for us to see this transformative technology really get integrated everywhere. And to do what you're suggesting in terms of really changing everything, and then also kind of being updated to improve its responses.
Interesting. Ben, can you respond to that? Are therapists using AI in any way?
I don't. It's, typically, I think the way that many therapists are using AI is to help with like note taking, right? If we sort of look at like what are those rote, straightforward tasks, right? I've been impressed, actually, surprisingly impressed by how well some of the programs that we've trialed have been able to, in some cases, just take notes, a few words that we might put in and turn them into notes, right? Or listen to a session, transcribe it, and turn it into a pretty good progress note. At the same time, a majority of therapists that I've talked to have experienced that end up not sticking with it, right? It's usually, it doesn't feel, in some cases, it doesn't feel ethical. It doesn't feel like the note is in their voice. It doesn't feel like it really captures what they would want to capture. It takes out something from it, right? And in some cases, it makes them uncomfortable that that's going into an official medical record, right? And in order to maybe review it to make sure that it feels good, it defeats the purpose of the time that it saves. In terms of other uses for AI in therapy, I think it can play a role. I don't know of many therapists who are using it, right? But I think there is potential for AI to supplement therapy. I think that's really where it can be effective, right? Not replacing therapists, but being that sort of adjunct to therapy, right? I have one client in particular who, when she needs somebody to bounce ideas off of, will hop on to an AI chatbot and have a conversation with it and reports that it's helpful. At the same time, and this is Jonathan, getting back to something that you mentioned, the AI chatbot can't. It can mimic empathy, but it can't practice. It can't create that empathy, right? It can give the appearance of a connection, but there isn't that human connection, right? A big part of therapy is working with somebody else, right? Is having that connection to another human being, right? We as humans are social beings. Part of what is part of mental health, is having connection to other people. If we don't have connection to other people, that's a recipe for depression. And so there's that potential, if people are relying on it, they're missing that human component, that connection, that true, real empathy.
Interesting. We talked a little bit and asked you, Jonathan, about different AI models like the Dartmouth model, and you mentioned other therapy models, and I understand that they can be better in some regards, but as I think about those therapy models and I think about the extension of training up an AI machine, if you will, on a particular area of therapy, I think about two people or one person in particular that has been a god in small g, god in psychology, Martin Seligman. Do you know? Are you familiar with Martin Seligman's work, Benjamin? Ben?
Yeah. Yes, positive psychology.
Positive psychology. And was his work ever misused?
I'm sure that it has, but I can't recall a specific example.
So actually, I think the whole idea of the non-torture torture methods that the U.S. used was in fact based off of a work that Martin Seligman had done. So when I think about training up AI models on particular things, one of the things I was a little bit horrified by is that one of Martin Seligman's former students, now in China, took all of his writings he could find, all of the speeches he could find, and ran it through an AI model, and now there's an AI Seligman. And by the way, there's an AI Esther Perel as well, an AI Perel, okay? And so I think about that, and I think, is this good or is this bad? I mean, on one hand, you've made me immortal, right? So it's got to be flattering. By the same token, if my work has already been misused once, what's the possibility of misuse in the future? I mean, do you have any perspective on that, Jonathan?
So I think one of the things that I personally use AI for editing mostly. For other pieces, I've just been burned too many times already in the sense that like, oh yeah, I can find evidence of something for you, and it's from a journal that doesn't exist by an author who doesn't exist. Similarly, like, I've used it to help me write code and the code fails. So like, I think in general, I have a skeptical eye towards AI. I think it's kind of one of these things that I would encourage there to be more done in terms of education campaigns and the like, to actually try and encourage individuals to be skeptical and to at least not try to always interrogate the responses. I think that's one of the challenges here. I think that I'm rather positive in most use cases of AI. I think I'm particularly most concerned about behavioral healthcare, just given the fact that, the country is, dealing with like, a mental health crisis of youth. And so I think everyone first kind of saw telehealth as being one transformative technology that's going to revolutionize care. And now we're only starting to understand kind of the quality of care dynamics of telehealth. Now AI is coming about and it's much more transformative in everyday life. And, to the points you were making before, a lot of kids are running over to using this tool when, like you can, ask a judge about like, a legal brief that an AI, creates, and it's complete BS, right? And so like it's one of these things where like we might want to make sure that the responses that are being given to kids are almost, if not 100%, kind of viable or something that we would want to see before letting kids just like run wild with it.
So, talking about giving AI to kids, first of all, I think the genie's out of the bottle,
Yeah.
and I think they're going to be using it no matter what we say. That said, I looked when I was looking at what Sam Altman and some of the other what some of the other people were saying. They were saying, I think I read that ChatGPT isn't even supposed to be used by anybody under the age of 13, and that there's going to be some controls between 13 and some other higher age to ensure that it's being used properly. But I look at that and I ask, how's that ever going to be enforced? How are you going to make sure that I'm 13 and not 12? How are you going to make sure I'm 21 and not 12? I don't get it. Is there some technology hack that I don't know about?
So my understanding is for a lot of this, that's kind of an active question, specifically using age gating. They might use a technology that uses the camera of your phone or whatever device you're using to take a picture of you, just try and guess what your age is, to confirm. You might have to like have a parent go ahead and log in for you. I will say kids are clever, exactly as you were saying. And I was listening to a podcast recently where at least the hosts were kind of speculating on the fact that kids might be able to try and get around this by, talking about back pain when they query AI before they query about, a question about their homework, an 8th grade homework test. We've seen kind of like similar types of like ways of workarounds, at least for technologies. We just recently had a paper come out on cell phone bans in schools, and it was horrifying to me that I heard that even if schools do have a cell phone ban, kids are now savvy enough to buy a burner phone, hand the burner phone in, and then use their smartphone during class. So you're right. I think kids, it's going to be kind of like a whack-a-mole problem where parents, guardians, they identify some workaround, they try to, react to that, and then kids come up with a new workaround.
Well,
Yeah.
if they're going to take pictures, right? I mean, what's to prevent me from holding up a picture of my father or mother? And if you say, well, that they can get around that, okay. Well, what if I put on a mask of an adult? What if if my household is is relatively wealthy? What happens if I 3D print a picture of my father's face and I just put it on, and then the camera comes on, they think it's my father, and I can ask it whatever I want to. It seems illogical to me that you're going to be able to control that. And many of the gates you're talking about, they simply ask you, are you 18? That happens in porn all the time. Are you 18? Yes.
Right. I think to your point also, I think one of the things that is a difficult problem right now is kind of circling back is that this linkage between parents and kids on these accounts. So I think there's kind of this larger discussion whether or not we should be linking parents so they can have access to their kids' accounts. But then that leads me to think what Ben was talking about with HIPAA before. Like if I was to query the LLM about some sort of, thought of suicidal ideation, like, is it the fact that, that's private information, but like the parent should be notified? Is that a form of violating HIPAA in some way? I guess it's not because it's an LLM, but like, I think the privacy questions are kind of like very difficult to navigate if you have this linkage between parents and kids on the same account.
Yeah, and I think it's naive to think that we're going to be able to use prohibition to keep kids and teens or anybody from using anything, whether it's AI, social media, drugs, alcohol, anything, right? And in all of these cases, what is more likely to be successful, instead of trying to keep kids away from it, is teach them how to have a healthy relationship with it, right? Model as parents how to have a healthy relationship with it, right? Kids watch what adults are doing, right? They mirror that, they repeat it. And so, rather than try to figure out how to keep these things from coming in, it's figuring out how to welcome them in a healthy way.
Interesting. So modeling might work. We're going to come back to that. Let's go back to a very difficult subject, suicide ideation. Not everybody's had the horror of being close to that or have seen the completion of that. I've seen both the aftermath as well as an almost several times. Sometimes what happens is that a person will reach out in some way before they go through with it. Okay. What happens if they reach out to their AI chat buddy to tell them that they're going to do something bad? They're going to actually go through with the idea of killing themselves. Do the companies have any obligation to immediately call 911? Is that even a thought process as we think about public policy, Jonathan?
So the research we did was kind of trying to get at this question, since that we did query them with these very, we had, I believe 13 clinical experts look at our questions and rank them from very low to high level risk for suicide. And then we actually queried the LLMs about this. And in a lot of cases, we found that the bots would try and nudge the individual to help. So they would try and put you in contact with the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. And so, that was encouraging for these very high risk types of prompts. Things that, if the prompts weren't very high risk, we would not get as much engagement. I think that's one of the concerns here, is that, what happens if, life is on a spectrum, questions are on a spectrum. If you're kind of like in this higher risk type of a prompt, but the LLM kind of misses it, what happens next in terms of like, how should the company respond? How should the LLM respond, et cetera? I think you're seeing now that there's legal cases that they're ongoing, in the sense that these companies are now being sued because of, I think there's been a couple of high profile suicide completions that are absolutely tragic. So I think right now they're trying to determine, liability, cause, relation, all of that in terms of who's responsible. I think that's one of the reasons why, we've been trying to really focus on the guardrails aspect here, by mostly trying to understand, how do these LLMs respond? You can try and put as many different sorts of guardrails as possible. You could send them to the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, but at the end of the day, this is like an algorithm. It might not catch something immediately. That like kind of like what Ben was saying before, was that if there's a subtle pause, does that tell us something as opposed to just kind of like interacting with the LLM and like typing in messages?
So in preparation for today, one of the things that I usually do is I try and read everything that a particular person's written about AI, and I certainly did that with you, Jonathan. I certainly did that with Rand itself, as much as I could absorb. But I also went to other sources, obviously. Mentioned, it's obvious from some of the questions that I've asked relative to the larger corporations that are dealing with AI. But I also looked to other researchers, and I found researchers that fundamentally said that if we continue to build AI and go for super intelligence, we're all going to die. And then I found many others that said, that a lot of that is snake oil. AI is really going to be able to help us. It takes a lot longer than we're thinking, even though everybody talks about how the vast improvements have occurred over the, just over a 2-year period. Those people would say we all need to calm down. There's going to be job loss. That's going to happen with technology. There's going to be improvements. There's going to be improvements that many people are going to be able to enjoy, but we're not going to all die by AI. Does Rand have a perspective on this? Have you looked at whether AI is happening faster than anything else that's happened in human existence, or is this going to evolve over time?
So I think so Rand's been pretty aggressive in their analyses because they view this as being a transformative technology. I direct you to the work that they've been doing in their global and emerging risk sector. They've been doing a lot of work in trying to understand, all sorts of aspects of, AI adoption and its use. And then, to your point, in terms of education, there's been work done in terms of how do schools use AI. Others have been focused on kind of this labor market disruption, impacts on macroeconomy. The work that I've been focused on has really been on the behavioral healthcare and mental health care space. I think it's going to be really challenging for someone or any real person to be an expert on all aspects of AI, even as a generalist, given the fact that there's going to be so many topics and things that are going to be hard to anticipate. I think Rand's really unique in the sense that it can diversify. It has experts in multiple fields, so we can look at AI's impacts in different areas. So that's a real strength of the company. So I think from my perspective, I'm really focused on the behavioral health care, child mental health aspects, but there are other resources on our website that do look at other aspects of the impact of AI.
Okay. And if you had to make a guess, you'd guess that it is transformative. It's going to be able to help us, but not necessarily replace Ben. I mean, do we get to fire him?
I don't think Ben will be replaced. I think, in my view, I think people are always going to really need the human element in a lot of everyday life. I don't think that, AI bots can serve a specific sort of role and do a specific sort of task. And I think one of the real important pieces here is kind of Ben also kind of describes earlier is that, we need models or understandings of how we should be interacting. What's a healthy relationship with AI? I don't know, and I could be wrong about this. I haven't really seen that for social media, but it would seem something that would be useful too for parents and kids. I think, someone like Emily Oster's been doing a lot of work in this space, Jonathan Haidt, for a lot of these, what are the proper ways that we should interact with these technologies in front of kids? What's the kind of most evidence-based information we have about specific technologies or healthcare needs? So I think, in my mind, we need something similar like that for AI, and I think we're still trying to develop that for social media, phones, etc. So I think that's my biggest challenge right now in trying to understand what is going to be the impact of AI, because it's just so new. So many people are using it, and we don't really have good visibility of how or what they're getting out of it.
So in your particular case, it may not be losing a job; it may be job security.
Yeah, I think that's. Well, no, I think in my mind, I think Rand's been very optimistic in terms of the use cases for using this type of technology for knowledge-based work in a lot of cases. So it's very efficient in doing all sorts of tasks. I think it's an adjustment period. like I said before, I don't know if you saw this MIT report also, but like there was been a lot of discussion about this, about whether or not, this type of technology is making money for companies or not. I think there's a other question about whether or not, or how many companies are actually adopting it. I think that's going to be one of the hinge points here that's going to be really important to understand. I think, for example, my understanding of the existing literature is that a lot of the ML-based, AI-based technologies, at least for hospitals, are being done in well-resourced hospitals as opposed to lower-resourced hospitals. And so, like, I think my concern there is there's going to be some sort of divergence in terms of, like, also, like, delivery of care, efficiency of care, and the likes. If AI is as transformative as possible, that, like, well-resourced providers are going to be better able to use it.
So I want to ask a jargon question, and I'm going to come back and ask you a jargon question about evidence-based, Ben. But Jonathan, as I have researched AI, I keep coming up with the terms generative AI and predictive AI. What we're looking at in the chatbots as they respond to healthcare questions, mental health questions, or what have you. Is that generative AI or is that predictive AI? Or is there a difference?
So I think that this is actually a challenge for us, because when in the study that I mentioned before, where we asked kids, we asked them about using generative AI, and whether or not they use generative AI chatbots like OpenAI's ChatGPT, and so we got a lot of pushback for doing that. It's like, do people even know what the difference is between predictive and generative is? I tend to just use the word generative. I know there are terms like predictive for other purposes, but I just tend to use generative because that's just the parlance that I know. In terms of the actual specifics and differences, that I can't comment as much to. I think JAMA has been very good in the sense that they've been putting out a lot of explainers in terms of what the differences are between large language models, and like generative AI. So I would direct you to those. I couldn't tell you what the difference between the two, between predictive and generative AI is.
Okay. Now, Ben, Jonathan used the word evidence-based, or the phrase evidence-based. And I know a lot of the therapies that you use, the protocols you use, are in fact evidence-based. But can you explain what that is for us?
Yeah. So what it means is, in a practical sense, is that when these protocols were developed and tested, they were compared to other treatments, right? We were able to have a large enough sample where we could see and measure outcomes and tell whether or not the protocol, right, whether it's cognitive behavioral therapy, whatever it might be, is effective, right, in a statistically significant way in achieving the outcomes that we're looking for, right, an improvement in mental health in this case.
Okay. So I want to be respectful of everybody's time. I want to give each of you an opportunity to kind of summarize, and we're going to go to Ben first and then Jonathan second. And when we do, if we could, Ben, I'm very curious from a human standpoint. You were starting to talk about what parents should be looking for. What, if you could explain that in a little bit more detail, what even young adults should be looking for, and so that we can not only get help, but or know when there's trouble coming. So if you could kind of summarize that for us, that would be good. And Jonathan, I know you guys continue to do a lot of research. If you could not only tell us what's coming soon, what we need to be paying attention to, and you can even let me know whether I should put more money into NVIDIA. Ben, we'll go first with you.
Yeah, I guess I'll bring in a few points in this case, right? Sort of like practical suggestions for parents who have kids and teens, and how they might be interacting with AI. I think the first part of that is asking your kids about it, right? Don't assume what they're doing or not doing, right? Ask them what platforms they're using, what do they like about it, when do they turn to them, right? Have they ever gotten something from it that has made them feel worse or confused? I think it's really important to look for behavioral shifts, right? Is your kid isolating more? Are they expressing frustration with real people? Are they quoting the AI chatbots verbatim? I think it's important to encourage transparency, not shame, right? Don't shut it down, right? These chatbots can be turned to because people are curious, right? It's convenient, right? It gets immediate response. I don't need to wait for my next therapy appointment. I think it's also important to set guidelines, like any other media, right? How long you're going to spend on it, what are you using it for? If the kid is young enough, supervision, right? If the kid is older, right? If they're an older teen, maybe not supervision so much as educating your kid about it and partnering with them in how they think about it. And I think there's an aspect of reassurance to offer parents as well that the AI can be a helpful supplement to therapy, whether it's with journaling, practicing some of the CBT techniques, but at the same time shouldn't be relied on to replace therapy. It doesn't have that human connection. It does not help the kids to build those human relationships.
So all good advice, and I appreciate that. The one thing I will say from a parent perspective, I'll use an old term. There's times when you're really busy. Both men, women are very, very busy. And sometimes you sit your kids in front of the electronic babysitter, otherwise known as the TV. I could imagine telling them to go ahead and use ChatGPT or any of the other chatbots they'd like to use for 20 minutes while I make dinner, decompress, whatever the case may be. So we have to not only communicate with our children, but we need to look at our own behavior. Jonathan, your turn.
Yeah, so I think it's been really an informative conversation for me too as a researcher. I think we've been trying to understand what are the key questions that need to be answered in this space. So I think I've alluded to this previously, but we have 2 papers coming out in the next month or so, around the time of this podcast being released, that are really focused on trying to understand kids' use of large language models or AI when they're angry, nervous, or sad, and then AI adoption by healthcare at large. I think what's coming next from our point of view and what we've been working on next is to kind of understand this dynamic better, in the sense that we're going to start trying to query kids about, who have you told that you use AI? So to get a better understanding of kind of like what's the interplay here. Some other work that we've been trying to pursue as well is to try and figure out how clinicians and providers are using AI in their everyday practices. And 2 other strands of research that we're pursuing. One, I've complained a lot here about how we don't know what actually is occurring in these transcripts. There are some good public use data sets out there, though, that do have listings of transcripts. So we've been doing some coding of that to see, what is said in these types of transcripts, regarding mental health. And then the last piece that we're doing work on is we're trying to come up with some benchmarks or some coding guidelines in order to understand how we can evaluate AI chatbot responses to kids' prompts.
Well, I appreciate your work. I appreciate your response. I know you guys do well thought out, well researched, well regarded work, and so thank you. I hope you continue to do so. I am disappointed that you didn't tell me whether I should continue to invest in NVIDIA or someplace else. I'm only up 50% in NVIDIA, which tells you I was late to the game. But if there's something else, feel free to email us or let us know on Instagram what we should be investing in.
Yeah, totally.
Our sponsor today is Equilibria Psychological and Consultation Services, an insurance-based provider whose mission is to help individuals achieve their personal potential and long-term growth by compassionately and respectfully helping clients live in balance. Visit equilibriapcs.com, equilibriapcs.com. You can look for them on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. You can also look for me on Instagram, Daniel J. Gomez 24, and on LinkedIn. Now for the disclaimer. I am not a medical professional, and I am not providing medical advice. The opinion, nor am I providing financial advice. So the opinion of our speakers is solely their own. This podcast is copyrighted and cannot be reproduced without the express written consent of EPCS Management, LLC. Thank you both.